guys. I'm here to help you understand what's going on in the church a little bit more. Today, I'm going to share with you a fantastic document by the Archbishop Emeritus of Philadelphia, one Charles Chaput, you may or may not be aware of, but he's a wonderful Archbishop who's now retired. And he's one of a growing number of clergy who are prepared to speak out, not in uncharitable terms, in charitable terms, to explain the problems with Pope Francis's pontificate. And he's published a wonderful article in First Things that I'm going to share with you today. But first of all, perhaps if you don't know who Chaput is, there's a real deep dive on him, which I've gone into a lot of detail on my channel, and I'll put a little link to that in the description so that you can go over and check it out. I posted this a couple of months ago, and it's got like 28,000 views. So you might find it useful, even though the quality of the video is rubbish. And obviously, you'll notice that the quality of the video has improved somewhat, and the sound and one thing and another. And that is basically because of your generosity. So if you believe in what we're doing here, if you believe in building a lay movement of sharing the beauty and majesty of the Catholic faith, and of building a community where we can support each other, please do visit catholicunscripted.com. You can leave a one-off donation, or you can subscribe, and that helps us. It helps us to improve the videos, and more importantly, it gives us more time to spend doing this sort of thing. So your help is really appreciated in that respect. So I'll put a link to that video. That's got lots of the background that you might find interesting about the way Chaput fits into the hierarchy in America and stuff like that. So I'll leave that there for you to have a little look at. But this is the guy. He's half French Canadian. His father was French Canadian. His mother was a Native American. So that's a wonderful, rich American background, if you like. In terms of his CV, he was former Archbishop of Philadelphia, as I said, born in 1944 in Kansas, the son of Joseph and Marion de Marais Chaput. He attended Our Lady of Perpetual Help Grade School in Concordia and St. Francis Seminary High School in Victoria, Kansas. And then he joined the Orders of Friars Minor Capuchin, St. Augustine Province in 1965. After earning a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from St. Fidelis College Seminary in Herman, Pennsylvania in 1967, he completed studies in theology at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. in 1969, earning a Master of Arts in Religious Education from Capuchin College in Washington in 1970, and he was ordained in August that year. Chaput received an MA in Theology from the University of San Francisco, served as an instructor in theology and spiritual direction from 1971 to 1974, and as Executive Secretary and Director of Communications for the Capuchin Province of St. Augustine in Pittsburgh from 1974 to 1977. So this is a guy with a lot of experience. He knows the game. He's been around. You can see there's a detailed CV of him there. And he's left us this wonderful... there are more and more prelates who are prepared to speak out. And I think that what's wonderful about this is that Chaput is very generous to the Holy Father. It's not a hit piece. He's just carefully going through it, praising him where praise is due, but also drawing attention to the errors. And this is really vital because there are errors. There are serious errors, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the Church deals with this going forward. Because I really do feel like a lot of the massive, massive problems that Pope Francis has presented us with are going to have to be corrected in some way by the next Pope. And we covered that in the Demos 2 video. You might want to go back and have a look at that on the Catholic Unscripted channel. So let's have a look at this latest thing from Charles Chaput. And it really is, I think it's very brave and it's very erudite. and it's got some really interesting details. He's an influential man, so it shows us perhaps some insight. There's this tension between the US bishops. Pope Francis is clearly at odds with the US bishops. That's been made clear by the nuncio, as well as a lot of the comments that have been made, and through Vatican mouthpieces like Spadaro, who runs one of the Jesuit magazines. They've written pieces against the USA, and you can see some of this coming out in some of the papal documents. Chaput here writes a really good, solid expose that explains a lot of what's going on. So let's go through it together. Joseph Ratzinger, better known as Pope Benedict XVI, stepped down from the papal ministry in 2013. But before he did, he began drafting an encyclical on the nature of Christian faith. His goal was to finish his ongoing thoughts on the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and their implications for true human development. For Benedict, faith was the foundation and the informing energy of the other two virtues. And to his great credit, a newly elected Pope Francis adopted Benedict's draft upon his accession. Francis added a few contributions of his own. Then he issued the resulting text as Lumen Fidei, the light of faith, his first encyclical and the inaugural document of this pontificate. Given later events, it's telling that some of the new Pope's strongest supporters were less than enthused with the style and content of Lumen Fidei. Understandably so. The text is a classically Ratzingerian work. In his previous roles as Peritus, that means expert, at Vatican II, and as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Joseph Ratzinger was one of the greatest Christian minds of the past century. Lumen Fidei is a tour de force reflection on the nature of faith, its role in reason's search for the truth, and its guidance for the Christian life. That's the good news. The other news is this. The rich quality of Lumen Fidei stands in unhappy contrast to every other document of the Francis tenure. It's a painful judgment, but true, and on that point, justice requires some context. Very few Americans live in the poverty that is common in other parts of the world. Thus, it's difficult for us to grasp the suffering involved in the lives of constant uncertainty. It's easy, too easy, to dismiss Pope Francis's hostility to modern capitalism and the materialist indulgence it breeds, as a form of soft Marxist ignorance. But his compassion for the poor, his focus on the forgotten people of the world's peripheries, and his stress on the priority of mercy are not just thoroughly Catholic. They're also a needed admonition and catechesis for those of us in the self-satisfied developed nations. The Pope's obvious distaste for US church leadership and American Catholic life may be rooted in a lack of knowledge, and it's deeply frustrating. But his critical attitude towards wealthy nations of the global north, and especially the United States, is not unwarranted. And I went through some of this in the Austin Ivory video that we recently did, where we looked in depth at the Aparecida, well, to some extent anyway, at the Aparecida document, which is said to be at the root of Francis's theology, if you like. In Francis's defence, we also need to remember that over a lifetime of ministry, a priest will hear thousands of confessions. Many will involve sincere persons struggling with impossibly complex circumstances. Francis is keenly attuned to their burdens. Merely quoting the catechism in such cases offers little solace. It also lacks humanity. The temptation to confirm, or at least to soothe, otherwise well-meaning people in their sinful behaviours and relationships can be intense. This helps to explain the Pope's frequent complaints about backwardism, rigidity and fixism in the Catholic thought. I mean, maybe it does. Maybe it does. And that's a really lovely thing, I think, for Archbishop Chaput to have said. But I think it probably, when we look at, say, for example, if you go back to the Austin Ivory conversation, where you've got this evidence that Cardinal Martini, the head of the St. Gallen Mafia, had a blueprint that Pope Francis is following, you could perhaps hypothesize that there's a deeper and darker thing going on here. So we have to be careful. But in all charity, that is a wonderfully generous explanation given there by Archbishop Chaput. He continues here. It explains his many criticisms of purportedly unforgiving clergy. It explains his dislike for doctors of the law and his loose approach to canonical issues. It explains his irritation with the intellectual gravitas and precision of his immediate predecessors. It explains his studied ambiguity on certain matters of doctrine and ecclesial discipline. It explains his refusal to live in the Vatican's apostolic palace and his disdain for some of the normal formalities of his office, and his habit of feeding confusion with imprudent and even provocative public comments. It also explains his peculiar hostility for the old Latin Mass and the alleged reactionaries who cling to it. Some of them, yes, bitter backsliders and nostalgia addicts, but others who are merely young persons and families seeking beauty and stability, and some connection with the faith's past in their worship. I mean, I don't know that it does explain all of those things, but I can see what he's doing there. It gives him a good opportunity to list off all these faults, doesn't it? It becomes hard to avoid the conclusion that an undercurrent of resentment is one of the distinguishing and most regrettable remarks of Francis's pontificate. Now, that is certainly true, and I can't help but feel that that is the case. Perhaps there are many examples of that. I'm sure you can remember this one, which I just found awful, and he hasn't done it since, to my knowledge, but he just had a long line of people he was greeting, and it's natural for them to want to kiss the pontiff's ring, the symbol of his authority as the Pope, and he just does this strange thing. He keeps smiling and he just pulls his hand away, and you think, what on earth is going on? It's just a normal thing. If he didn't want people to do that, why didn't he say, please don't do that? Instead, he goes through this bizarre thing here that I just find absolutely impossible to understand. And that makes it look like, that he's got this kind of strange side to his personality. I don't know. Okay, let's go back to Archbishop Chaput here. Regrettable. So let's read that bit back again. It becomes hard to avoid the conclusion that an undercurrent of resentment is one of the distinguishing and most regrettable marks of the Francis pontificate. Regrettable because it damages the dignity of the Petrine office. Regrettable because it creates critics and enemies rather than reconciling them. So this is what I keep saying, is that it brings about division. That's really all, one of the main hallmarks of this papacy, and that is not of Christ, is it? That's not of the Church. Regrettable because it undercuts every pontificate's central task, providing a credible, faithful source of Catholic unity, and the advisors, apologists, and ghostwriters who surround this pontificate have been instrumental in adding to the problem, and that is definitely the case. Which brings us to the person of Victor Manuel Cardinal Fernandez, a theologian and former rector of Argentina's Pontifical Catholic University. Fernandez is the former Archbishop of La Plata. He is also a close associate, counselor, and sometime ghostwriter in the ministry of Pope Francis, who appointed him prefect for the dicastery, formerly the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the DDF. The DDF occupies a special place in the Vatican firmament. It has the task of protecting the integrity of Catholic teaching and practice, a vital duty to the life of the faithful. The reason for its preeminence should be obvious. The Catholic Church is a creedal community. Now, this is a sentence that keeps coming up recently, and it was something that was spoken about in Demos 2 as well. It's a creedal community as well as a sacramental one. What we believe about the Eucharist, for example, or the nature and purpose of human sexuality, and how we understand and apply what we believe, constitutes the glue that seals Catholics as a distinct people. Fernandez thus holds a uniquely important office, just as Joseph Ratzinger did before him. But in his thinking and substance, Fernandez is a man very different from his great predecessor. Much has already been made of Fernandez's controversial 1995 book, Heal Me With Your Mouth, The Art of Kissing. We needn't revisit it here. It's not a title one would normally associate with the doctrine chief of the Catholic Church, but dismissing Fernandez's thought as superficial would be a mistake. He has a significant body of work to his credit. His thinking isn't shallow. And this is the important sentence. It's simply wrong in some crucial ways with big implications. It's simply wrong in some crucial ways with big implications, okay? But wrong how exactly? No one has unpacked the problems in Fernandez's thought more respectfully, persuasively, and comprehensively than the Spanish priest and theologian José Granados, the former vice president of Rome's Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family, before Pope Francis changed its focus. Granados is Superior General of the Disciples of the Hearts of Jesus and Mary and co-founder for the Veritas Amoris project, writing in the winter 2023 issue of Communio International Catholic Review. Granados methodically assesses Fernandez's understanding of charity and its application to complex moral situations. The article, Charity Builds Up, 1 Corinthians 8:1, but which charity, on Victor Manuel Fernandez theological proposal, despite the turgid title, makes for essential reading. And I'll pop a link to that here. This is basically what he's referring to. This is the article, and you can download the PDF here. And perhaps I'll go through it. If you want me to go through it, leave a comment and I'll see if I can do a video on that at some point in the future. Granados notes that Cardinal Fernandez stresses the immediate unavoidable context of theology. Thus, for the Cardinal, circumstances matter greatly, as does doing theology less from theoretical heights and more from concrete human situations. That really strikes a note with me from some of the rhetoric we've heard from Pope Francis. In the words of Granados, Fernandez claims that the Christian people, especially the simple and the poor, possess a special insight into the truths of faith, even though they have little speculative or rational power. There are forms of knowledge of God that elude scholars, and that simple people are better able to grasp through lived experience of the divine mystery. This appreciation of the people's context leads Fernandez to write that, instead of sensus fidelium, the sense of the faithful, the sense of the people, the reason for this change, I've got that complete right, let's go back. Sensus fidelium, the sense of the faithful, it will be better to speak of sensus populi, the sense of the people. The reason for this change is that with the expression sensus fidelium, the believers can see themselves as separate from one another and thus lose the knowledge that comes from their unity as a people. For there are elements of knowledge that are not accessible to the isolated person, but only to the person in relationship with the whole culture. So what is he saying there? The appreciation of the people's context leads Fernandez to write that instead of the sensus fidelium, instead of the sense of the faithful, it would be better to speak of the sense of the people. The reason for this change is that with the expression sensus fidelium, the believers can see themselves as separate from one another and thus lose the knowledge that comes from their unity as a people. So believers would see themselves separated in some way from the people because there are elements of knowledge that are not accessible to the isolated person, but only the person in relationship with the whole culture. As Granados argues, however, the expression sensus populi alone is insufficient, and this is what comes from that statement, obviously, is that it ignores the centrality of faith. It carries the risk that the sociological vision of people would take precedence over revelation as the foundation for our knowledge of God. And there's a lot of that in Francis's words, aren't there? That it lacks a metaphysical dimension, and that the understanding of revelation is central to the Christian mystery. What Fernandez actually proposes, in effect, is not so much a theology of the people, but a theology from the people. This approach contradicts the true, immediate, and inescapable context of Catholic theology given by the Church as the body of Christ, which in turn is rooted in the Eucharist and in the network of relationships that the Eucharist establishes. Granados goes on to observe that Fernandez, in describing charity, insists that its main external manifestation is to help our neighbours improve their material needs. But for the Christian, though a person's material needs are important, they're not charity's primary focus. Authentic charity and its expression in mercy consists of helping others to live in union with God, which also includes external acts like fraternal correction. Moreover, for Aquinas, the virtue of obedience, inasmuch as through it we offer our will to God, is greater than all the moral virtues, including mercy. We rightly feel compassion for persons locked in sinful situations, but compassion is not a license to minimize or excuse or bless the destructive behaviors involved therein. And moreover, if we fail to acknowledge that they're destructive behaviors, how are we helping the individual locked in sin? We're not freeing them from sin, and that is one of the greatest missions and charisms of the church, that its ability to do that the gospel sets us free. That's what we mean when we say the gospel sets us free, because it doesn't leave us chained to our sin. It frees us from it. It gives us, through grace, the power God gives us the power to free ourselves of that sin. Granados' critique of Cardinal Fernandez's theology is more extensive and compelling than can be captured here, but in the end it demonstrates the inadequacy of Cardinal Fernandez's views, given the actual work demanded of the DDF to nourish and defend the Catholic doctrine and the faith of committed Catholic believers. It also raises uneasy questions about the prudence of appointing him in the first place if he doesn't understand or believe in the same faith that the Church has always professed. So fundamentally, in nice words, that's what Chaput is saying here. He's saying that Fernandez believes in something completely different, and maybe the Pope does as well. Blaise Pascal, the 17th century Catholic mathematician, scientist and philosopher, is often remembered for his comment that the heart has its reasons, which reason does not know. The human heart is our counterbalance to the brutality of cold logic and truth without love, but it's not infallible. And feelings, including compassion, when they become sovereign in the discernment of moral good and evil, can be dangerously flawed guides. No new paradigm or development of doctrine can result in an alibi for sin in the light of God's word and the wisdom of the Church's long experience. The heart does indeed have its reasons, and sometimes they're wrong. So there you go. It's an interesting article there from Archbishop Chaput, isn't it? And I think it's well worth dwelling on it. So I'll put a link there and you can have a look through and think about it. It's interesting that he's prepared to come out now and in an intellectual way, really, start to break down Pope Francis's theology and some of his ideas and demonstrate what the errors are in his thinking. And I think we're going to see more and more of this as we go forward towards the conclave. And hopefully afterwards we'll see a big correction. One of the most interesting things is that he says that those who are like the Pope's splainers, who are out there desperately trying to twist what's going on to make it more palatable to Catholics, are in the end doing the magisterium a disservice. I think that is true because they're ignoring a lot of the actual reality of what's going on, and that just adds to the confusion even more. And some of them, unfortunately, like Mike Lewis, for example, of Where Peter is going around attacking people if they've got a problem with this, which seems deeply disingenuous because Catholicism is about faith and reason. What we believe is reasonable, and if the things that we're hearing are deeply and distressingly at odds with the way that we've understood the faith, then we're going to be in a huge amount of trouble. And we have to be able to explain the truth in a way that it can be understood. And if we can do that in a way, if we can understand it well enough to explain it simply in a way that can be understood, then it will be believed. And that's what the most important dimension of it is. The Pope's ambiguity leads to a situation where you've got multiple people coming up with different conclusions, different ideas of what it believes. And in the end, it just breeds, as we've seen, massive amounts of confusion, as well as people with spurious agendas running off in all kinds of directions. Listen, thanks very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe to our channel. And as I say, if you're in a situation to help us with support, please do. We'd really appreciate every penny helps, and gives us the opportunity to do more of this work. So subscribe to Catholic Unscripted and help us by supporting our work. God bless you. See you soon. Thanks very much for watching.